Audit Committee for Hillsborough Rapid Transit. If we could rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The first order of business is approval of the minutes from the February 18th meeting. We have a first and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Next would be public comment on the agenda items. We'd ask you to limit any comments to 3 minutes per speaker. Do we have a list? Did anybody sign up? Right, there's apparently no one here to speak on behalf of the public, so we'll move on to presentations. So we have a presentation, Imagine Hillsborough 2040.
Good morning. I'm Beth Alden. I'm the director of the Hillsborough Metropolitan Planning Organization, and thank you so much for having me here this morning. We are going to be updating the long-range transportation plan this year. There is an update due at the end of this calendar year, and so I am here to talk with you about how we organize that in such a way that it sets HART up for success in future communications with Tallahassee and Washington, D.C. And we're working very closely with your staff to make sure that that will happen. So I'm going to give you kind of an overview of where we were in the last plan, and then we can talk a little bit about where we go from here. So the purpose of a long-range transportation plan is basically to assure the federal government in particular that all of the local governments and agencies are on the same page about where we go as a community with our transportation investments. And so it's you think of it as kind of like a mile wide and an inch deep. It's creating this broad brush, holistic picture of where we're headed as a community. We are doing this for unincorporated Hillsborough County and for the 3 cities of Tampa, Temple Terrace, and Plant City. And it does cover all modes of surface transportation, and by surface I mean not airports or Tampa Bay, but everything that connects them, roads, transit, trails, and technology, and so forth. So this is our official communication to the state of Florida and to the federal government about our priorities as a community, allows federal dollars to be spent here now, and then directs future federal and state funds towards the projects that this community values over time. Thank you so much. And what it does for HART is it lays the groundwork for future grant applications. So right now you're gearing up potentially towards an expansion of your transit system, hopefully, fingers crossed. As you do that, you may be seeking state grants, federal grants to match those local dollars. One of the first questions that will get asked when HART does that is it in the long-range transportation plan? And so what we want to do this year is try to set up this plan so that it is going to support the grant applications that you all want to move forward with. Now, we know that there are a lot of decisions still to be made about a potential transit expansion. And you all are going to be the ones making those decisions about transit expansion. The MPO is not going to be making those decisions about routes. So what we are doing is trying to set up the financial end of this with as much flexibility as we possibly can. And then in the areas where we have less flexibility, we'll come back and amend. And let me show you how we did that last time. So in 2014, we didn't even know what our funding sources were. We knew that there were a lot of shortfalls. And so that plan, which was called the Imagine 2040 plan, identified a number of different ways that we could improve the outcomes in our transportation system by plugging in a little bit more funding. And so it looked at what is our performance at our existing funding levels, broad brush, big picture, and what's our performance if we put in some other investments. And what ended up being on the ballot last November was very similar to what was in the long-range transportation plan. So I'm going to show you just a few slides about the sales tax in particular, and then we'll look at what the financial scenarios were in the Imagine 2040 plan. So overall, the use of the sales tax, on the left on this pie chart, you see what was approved by the voters, that the sales tax funds would be split 54% between the county and municipalities, 45% to HART, 1% to the MPO for planning and analysis purposes to support you all. That's fairly similar to what was in the Imagine 2040 plan, again, adopted back in 2014, with non-transit 53%, transit 39%, and unallocated 8%. The next two slides zoom in on the right side and the left side of that pie chart. So looking at the county and municipalities, share slices of the pie. On the left side, what was approved by the voters, 20% of the funds to maintenance, 26% to congestion reduction, 27% to safety, 12% to walk bike, and 15% to any or other. On the right side, what was in the Imagine 2040 plan, again, really close to that. 22% for maintenance, 26% congestion, 27% safety, 7% trails and side paths, 18% to major projects. And I'll show you what we meant by major projects in a second. On the transit funds side, so again, on the left, the sales tax, 45% to bus services, 35% to transit and exclusive right-of-way. The Imagine 2040 plan had a little bit more for transit and exclusive right-of-way. So 46% for bus, 47% to fixed Guideway transit projects. Now, the way that the sales tax proposal came together, the way that it was able to pull those kinds of dollars out of the long-range plan, is that we had done this financial scenario planning in the long-range plan. So I'm going to show you just two of the scenarios. And what we were doing, again, holistic, broad brush picture of where we are in terms of funding, and we were comparing all of the available funding sources against all of the needs. And as you're thinking about how we did that, we were trying not to be prescriptive about, say, where you install a bike lane for safety in the year 2035. We don't need to be getting into that level of detail. What we need to be getting into is, do you have enough bike lanes in general for a community this size and this level of density? And so that's the kind of planning that's in these building blocks. It's very big picture. So financial scenario one, the baseline scenario, on the right-hand side you see those are the existing revenues. Stack them up. Local government gas tax, transit revenues, that's your property tax and your fare box. Metropolitan grants, so those are federal grants prioritized by the MPO. Those are very flexible, but they're limited in size. And then state maintenance and non-SIS, non-strategic intermodal system highways. So those are the areas where we have some influence over spending as a community. On the left side, the expenditures, stacking them up from the bottom, this is what we were investing in pavement, in bridges, in congestion management, in crash reduction. And what we sort of flagged these as level 1 performance levels. So just one example for pavement at the level of investment that we had at that time, that meant that on average we could resurface our roadways every 50 years. That's obviously not desirable. Your major roads, you'd like to resurface them every 17 years. Local roads, maybe 25 to 30 years. In any case, 50 isn't the number that you want to be at. So we had similar numbers for all of these building blocks. So I said we looked at a bunch of different financial scenarios. The one that the board ultimately approved, the MPO board ultimately approved, was new funding equivalent to a 1-cent sales tax. And what that enabled was better performance on the left-hand side. So you see down at the bottom of that expenditures column, pavement, that actually gets us up to the level of investment that we need to resurface our roadways on time and replace our bridges on time. So let's look at what that meant in terms of bus services. And again, this is a snapshot from November 2014. So what were those numbers based on? And I'm going to focus here on where HART comes into the picture. And again, this is going to be broad brush. So focusing on bus services, the baseline scenario on the left, the sales tax scenario, increasing that expenditure level on the right. So those numbers were based on the HART Transit Development Plan that was current back in 2014. And so the level 1, that orange block in the baseline scenario, that was based on the existing funding level that HART had at that time, in which HART indicated that HART could continue the existing service and maybe add some night and weekend trips, because there wasn't the ability to expand the buses on the roadways. At an expanded funding level, this level 3, that would include a number of new Metro Rapid routes and then new and improved local express, flex, and circulator routes. And so what we did was to look at HART's plan, roll all of those numbers up into an aggregate investment level, and then look at how it serves the population. So we were looking at the future population, and this was based on our growth projection for the year 2040. We compared the level 1, the low investment level, with the expanded investment level. At the low investment level, we're providing frequent bus service to one-sixth of our people and jobs. On the right, with that sales tax scenario investment level, we're serving almost half of our people and jobs with frequent service, and almost 2/3 of people and jobs with somewhat frequent service, which is every 20 to 30 minutes. Two other slices of the pie here. So bus maintenance, there is a piece in here for that as part of the state of good repair. Those are goals and targets that you all have set. Again, that gets reflected in the long-range transportation plan. And so again, we're looking at the aggregate spending amount over a 20-year time frame, and what does that mean in terms of performance. And so we were looking at a difference in the fleet replacement cycle from 16 years, getting it down to 10 years. And what does that mean in terms of the number of road calls per year? And so again, broad brush estimate at the higher investment level, looking at 5 fewer breakdowns every week. So the third area that I'm going to talk about is fixed guideway transit, or transit in its own right-of-way. This is the area where we have to actually list individual projects in the long-range transportation plan, and that's because of federal rules. So what we're planning to do with this, since you all are, I imagine, going to be looking at where you might like to invest in fixed guideway transit, and I imagine there might be some changes and adjustments to previous plans that have been done in this community. We are looking at creating some maps and some cost estimates that are pretty broad brush. You know, we're going to be thinking about maps that have like big broad marker line across them to show the general idea of what major areas in our community we would want to connect with fixed guideway transit. We do have to attach some cost number to it under the federal rules. So we're going to be making some assumptions about that. But again, we can come back and amend the plan and update that. So baseline scenario, we did not have any funding for fixed guideway transit in it. Sales tax scenario, we did. And what was in the Imagine 2040 plan that those numbers were based on was a connection from downtown to USF and to the West Shore Airport area. These are our largest job centers in West Central Florida. They go through high transit markets. So there's good reasons, there's a good case to be made in the long-range transportation plan. So, you know, if you go back to that first slide and you're thinking about how do we tell the story to Tallahassee and to Washington, D.C., what we're doing for you is trying to create that big picture of why is this important for the economic growth of the state of Florida? and for the country, where Florida is the third largest state. Our metropolitan areas are responsible for 80% of our gross domestic product. So it makes sense to have investments that are connecting our key economic spaces. That's what the role of the long-range plan is, to help you tell that story, so when you send your grant application up to Washington, D.C., they send you back $250 million. Cross your fingers, right? There are a lot of possibilities about how you connect downtown to USF and the West Shore Airport, rubber tire options, steel wheel options. What's important is not getting stuck in traffic and keeping costs down as much as you can. The Imagine 2040 plan made some assumptions about how we could keep costs down, and those are based on previous feasibility studies. So things like reusing the streetcar system, reusing the CSX tracks, using the interstate shoulders, or the right-of-way in the median of the interstate between downtown Tampa and West Shore, repurposing lanes on roadways where there's room to do that. The long-range plan also did include the water transit pilot project, going from MacDill Air Force Base over to southern Hillsborough County. So just kind of a quick zoom in on where we were. Again, this is a snapshot from 2014, and completely acknowledging that all of this is going to have to be updated. But those numbers back in that Imagine 2040 plan, the downtown to West Shore fixed Guideway concept was to reuse the streetcar, modernize it, extend it, look at it as a way to connect from downtown to the West Shore Multimodal Center, with a one-seat ride from the convention center to the multimodal center right off of 275. So I mentioned the other cost reduction strategy was to reuse the existing freight track to make that connection between downtown Tampa and USF. We used some cost estimates from other cities, and the concept was crash-worthy vehicles on the existing freight track, which would have to be refurbished. So this would be not too dissimilar from what Orlando is doing. The nice thing about our freight track is it's actually through the middle of the city, unlike Orlando's, which is, kind of closer over to the interstate. So that's where those numbers came from. And we were also looking at how you would connect those systems to the rest of the region ultimately in the long range. There's been a lot of talk here about how do we connect across county lines. And so there are opportunities to do that. We start in this core area. There are opportunities to extend a transit service using those freight rail tracks up to the rapidly growing areas of Pasco County, or west across to Pinellas and go through the southern part of Carrollwood and West Chase and Oldsmar. We have done ridership forecasts. We do long-range forecasts. Again, this is a little bit like forecasting the weather in the year 2045. But we do traffic forecasts, we do ridership forecasts. And so what you see here is kind of the order of magnitude of how well used some of the stops might be on those lines that I mentioned. The map on the right, if you can kind of see the big blobs around downtown Tampa, that's because there's a lot of ons and offs at those stations. Then you see another big station at Hillsborough Avenue, another couple of big stations at Fowler and next to USF campus, and going west over to the West Shore area. Big blob over there, a lot of ons and offs there. And again, we'll be updating these numbers for the new plan. So one of the things that was interesting when we did public outreach last time, we asked people, where should we invest? And investing in the greater downtown area by making a rail connection to USF and Tampa International Airport, that was, widely the most popular investment area for major projects. So you see that big green bar, that's thumbs up. Over thumbs down is the orange bar. That's actually really similar results to the survey that we just did last summer, which is It's Time Tampa Bay. We asked about a lot of different kinds of transportation improvements. This is all out of all kinds of transportation improvements that we put in front of the public. The top 2 rated ones were statewide rail and rail local or regional. We had pictures of those, renderings of those. But lots of 4-star and 5-star ratings on those 2 types of transportation. So, what do we do next? We have a public hearing on the books for November. And so leading up to that, we are finalizing our data sets, which is our population and job growth projections for our horizon year of 2045. We have wrapped up our baseline assessment of what our system performance is right now. We have wrapped up our revenue forecast. So we have kind of all the basic building blocks. We are in the throes of putting together the needs assessment, and we're working with your staff on the needs assessment for bus service. But again, don't expect that we're going to list individual routes. We're relying on you all to make the decisions about routes, and we're going to be rolling all of that up into a big picture number and performance outcome. We're also working with your staff on what lines to show as possible fixed guideway transit corridors, because we're updating those ridership forecasts and the traffic congestion forecasts. We'll come back initially to the MPO board with what that first draft of those forecasts look like. Be very happy to come and talk with you all about that too. And we're also going to be seeking input from the public over the summer about the performance levels and the lines for the major projects on the maps, the fixed guideway transit and the road widening projects. Those will be on maps that people can give the thumbs up and thumbs down to. So again, it's pretty big picture, and I am here so that you can give me guidance about what you want to make sure is considered as we're developing this plan. Thank you.
Well, I'm not seeing anybody else with a question. I have a question. So, and I understand, you know, the mile wide and inch deep, and I think what your, you know, role is as the EPO. And, but, you know, one of the things that's been a question in my mind, and I'm, you know, resident of a neighborhood that's in central Tampa, and, you know, as I look at this, you know, we now have funds for capital improvements and the, you know, high potential to expand the transit system. We look at a map and we say that, you know, well, like here's a theoretical bus station with a lot of ons and offs, but I think when we look at, you know, like finalizing data sets and what the changing demographics and population means, how closely are we looking at that to how it may be, you know, how, you know, the, you know, population around these places where we'd like to put these stations may be affected, what the potential for growing actual transit-oriented development, you know, areas within the community are, you know, understanding that the goal wouldn't be to, I think, spend a lot of money on, you know, structured parking and park and ride type situations, but to encourage development that can then help to make the fare box side of the equation work. So how does the MPO look at that, and what type of detail would we be able to get in our next 2045 plan?
That's a great question, because the development pattern has, you know, so much interaction with what the ridership turns out to be on these systems. And we are lucky to be housed with the Planning Commission, which is responsible for preparing the comprehensive plans for the local governments that are then, you know, reviewed and approved by the local governments. But as they're preparing those comprehensive plans, they're looking at development trends, where is the development going, and they're looking at both, you know, some of the outward growth pressure that we've been seeing and some of the infill and redevelopment that's happening in the core of our metro area, and we're seeing more and more of that. So there's been a lot of behind-the-scenes work over the last year between the Planning Commission and the local government staff to try to fine-tune those numbers and make sure we have a good handle on where we're going with population and job growth. That being said, there may be opportunities to further incentivize infill and redevelopment around station areas. There are some policies already in the Tampa Comprehensive Plan to do that, but they are not tied to specific locations. So the policies have been drafted, but not attached to specific spots. And so that potential is there for you all to work with as you kind of zoom in on what are the corridors that you may be focusing on for major investments, and then where are the stations along those corridors that you'd like to focus on. There are real opportunities for public-private partnerships in those areas, and we have, I think, a great opportunity to fine-tune those land use policies so that all syncs up nicely. And part of this also is that you all have partnered with the Planning Commission in the City of Tampa for a transit-oriented development grant that will actually get you some, hopefully, consultant support to do the on the ground kind of field review and nitty-gritty. Let's make sure that this particular area has the right policy attached to it.
Commissioner Kim.
As you can probably imagine, I have about 50 questions here, but I'll just try and do a few. So, I've read through the 2040 plan, which I think is like 212 pages or something.
Poor person.
And so, it's kind of almost impossible to read through. But so what you're saying is what we're seeing here, because I would have never surmised this from the 2040 plan, what you showed here. So was this part of what was shown, and what we see here was what was supposed to be or is in the 2040 plan as you know it, was like this? Are these graphics from 5 years ago when?
They are in the 2040 plan, yes.
Right, but was this, so I would have never quite gotten this from the 2040 plan. And so, because of it's not clear like this is. It's like parts of it are pulled and highlighted in terms of like how this is put together and what I see or understand. Right. So just in seeing a few things, obviously I'm pleased to see the ferry and the CSX in there. I have, with the fixed Guideway forecast, I also looked at the 2012 CSX or 2010, whatever that was, that plan about CSX that was never finished for whatever reasons.
Yeah.
Thank you. And as I remember, just in my memory, the boardings were, I thought something like 12,000 a day. Here, though, I see 33.5K boardings. This is just,
So that's for the entire line.
The 12,000?
On the left, the boardings per day, yeah, almost 13,000 boardings per day between downtown and West Shore.
Oh, which?
On that.
Oh, because I saw the. No, I'm talking about the USF to downtown.
Yeah.
On the CSX tracks, I thought it was like more than 12,000 a day.
So that comes back to how often do you run it? So,
okay, so
yeah, the devil is in the details. Yes.
So I just feel like then that kind of games this and is really a false picture. And that's where I really have problems. One thing is it talks about frequency here, and I was wondering because it wasn't defined out here, and so I was waiting, and I heard you say frequency to serve half the people is 20 to 30 minutes, which that's like not frequent for me.
That was our somewhat frequent level.
I understand, compared to what we have, which is like shockingly infrequent on almost anything except for Nebraska Avenue, a little bit better on Florida Avenue and Hillsborough. We don't have anything like any normal community in my mind. Any normal metro area would think was frequent service, which is the key to ridership. So I think this kind of gives a false picture when the frequencies aren't compared, because also you're doing the people mover, which is moving people right now from the airport proper to the rental car facility. So and it's doing it like every 2 minutes, and so it's really an inter-airport service. So to compare that and do those boardings relative to what is, you're saying, probably infrequent service through our most dense transit area in the region, I think is doesn't give a true picture of what, when I look at how our resources should be dedicated. The other thing, as you know, that I always have issues with is the fact that we're not getting a picture here of costs. And I think it's really important for people that are making these decisions and moving forward on this to understand some of the costs involved. And that's that the people mover, I think it's really important for people to understand that it's $300 million a mile for the people mover. That's true cost of what it is right now. Not to mention, I think, is it $3.8 million a year, I think, in operating? So, something
like that.
And that's a 1.25 mile line from the airport to the rental car service. So I think it's
again with high frequency. So you're
yeah,
exactly,
super high
exactly
frequency.
Right. The frequency very much affects the costs in there.
Right.
So I'm hearing you say that you'd like to see some numbers with different assumptions on frequency versus ridership and what those trade-offs are.
Right. And here's the other, just to say, because this is real choices. This, to me, is real choices about who we're serving and how we serve them and how we build our community going forward in the future. Do we invest huge numbers of dollars and costs into a people mover in a little teeny area to serve a little teeny, I think, I would say an elite population that has other options, or do we look at how we spread this money around? By comparison, $300 million a mile for a people mover at the airport, which, by the way, the other day I saw a lot of news about LAX and all these people getting excited about rail to LAX, and it was an internal people mover, and I'm not kidding you, it was $2 billion a mile. Just so, like, that would eat up like everything we have, in this whole thing for 30 years. So just to be clear, so you compare $300 million a mile on a people mover to what they're doing for Sunrail in Orlando just a few years ago, and that is to buy the right-of-way, the track, build the stations, have the locomotives, do everything. And again, the frequency and operating is a whole different thing outside of this, which is really to be considered. But so in $300 million a mile compared to $20 million a mile. And so those are choices. The other choices are choices about now I think we're seeing we've seen in like 5 years, what I see is a really big transformation in terms of electric buses, but in terms of bus technology, and then fixed guideway, BRT in the in the lanes that we have, and looking at even partial set aside of lanes where the buses can sometimes be put in traffic and sometimes not. I mean, I think all that is kind of I think a newer trend all over the country, but that is super low cost relative to these other transit options and in terms of service and what we can do. So again, I just think it's really important. And then the ferry, you have like almost like no infrastructure costs, and relative to everything else, as I say, I have, for the ferry system that's now proposed, it's like a 35, I think it's gone to about a $35 million capital cost. But, I have people in the community that say $35 million for a ferry, and I say, do you know that that's what you spend, and I'm not kidding, on an overpass to I-75. That's what we're looking at in Apollo Beach. Actually, I think something like $50 million for the overpass and a little road. So I think that my point is, as you call it, it's really important not only to have capital comparison costs and people to understand what we're investing and how we're investing, but also to understand frequency and operating costs, which are never addressed in anything I've seen in my 2.5 years of serving on any of the transit boards in the region or anywhere else. It's not even something that we look at, which I always find kind of shocking. So those are, I guess, generally my comments. The other things is that I certainly, also just specifically this, which I guess the route from downtown to West Shore, and I know I keep seeing this, modern trams can run on existing street line. I just ask a question because this, so in terms of that, and could navigate, because this board, it's important for us to know. So this is something that runs on steel wheels in Ybor, but then would go to what? Like rubber tires in the interstate? I don't get how that works.
No, it would still be steel wheels. This was the concept in the Transit Assets and Opportunities study that we did. It was a sort of an early broad brush feasibility study back in 2013 of looking at what could we do with this streetcar. It's an asset, maybe it's an underutilized asset. Atlanta was at the time working on a project that they have since built using modern streetcar on tracks, serving their urban core. And so we looked at, what happens if you take the existing streetcar system and you put some modern trams on that look similar to Atlanta's. You don't use the overhead catenary that there have been some maintenance issues with, and you extend it farther west to make that connection to that major job center. And that was mostly because we don't have any existing track that you can reuse in that area. So either we're building new lanes or building new track. And so we looked at this as maybe the least cost option to create track between downtown and West Shore.
So then again, I would be looking at the estimates, but I also think that it's pretty clear from what's being evaluated in places, metro areas across America, that it's really not a wise thing to be running a train down your highway. It's just pretty much everyone's moving away from that and realizing that it's not a successful model. And I know that this particular line, I guess, was approved in the 1990s report. There is an EIS on it, and it can go ahead, but to me, that whole thing hugely would need to be reevaluated in terms of 20 years later, what would be best practices, what would be wise, and
that would be great if you all reevaluate this and tell us where ultimately to put the line on the map, and that's a tall order to do between now and November.
Right.
So what we're probably aiming to do is put some kind of broad brush line on the map between downtown and West Shore, and then come back and amend the plan after you all have had an opportunity to look at the route and the technology.
Right. Okay. I just wanted to thank you for kind of clarifying how we could do this. I wanted to throw that out because it's an ongoing great concern with me. And I think it's really important for us when we move ahead in the future to really be thinking about how we can provide the greatest resources for building the community and serving people with transit moving forward. I think we have good resources to do that, but I think we could not make the best decisions and kind of not do well by what the voters have given us. So I'm really concerned about costs and how we invest those moving forward.
So thank you, Commissioner Kemp. I think it's an astute observation that the issue related to frequency of service and and how that may affect the form of what mode gets chosen now that we have the means to do it between downtown and USF. And so, what is the process by which HART gets involved in you updating the plan that is is our plan?
So we are working with your staff on an ongoing basis. We have meetings about every 2 weeks, particularly right now as we're looking at some of the traffic and ridership forecasts for the horizon year. So it's really up to you how much you as board members want to be involved in the process. We're happy to come back and bring you information, ask for further feedback at your convenience.
All right, thank you, Commissioner. I'm sorry, Mr. Mechanic.
Yeah, thank you. The problem that we're facing here is the fact that the MPO has to submit this plan in November, which is well before and just addressing the fixed guideway component here. I mean, I think we all can intuitively understand the bus expansion process is not going to take nearly as long, but we're not going to be making big decisions about specific routes and modes of transportation before November. So the question and I guess my comment is, can we keep the plan, the long-range plan, generalized to really just identifying corridors, which I think we do have some understanding of, the high-demand corridors, without choosing modes of transportation? Because that's where you're going to get into all these cost analyses that we're not going to do between now and November. So with that in mind, Beth, can you help answer that?
So we will make it as flexible as we possibly can. One of the ways that we do that is by creating kind of a summary report that's still the 212-page report that you looked at. But there are also a bunch of supplemental technical reports. And so we can put that level of detail that's required by the feds into the background reports and put the more broad brush into the information into the summary report.
But does it have to include choices on modes of transportation? I mean, that's probably
it has to
the
include
biggest...
a cost estimate, and the cost estimate has to be based on something.
So can you put alternatives in there? Can you put
could.
BRT and rail as two alternatives for each of these routes?
Cost it out both ways?
Yeah.
I don't see why not. And then we'll just put the most expensive one in there so that our bases are covered.
All right, Director Melendez. And then...
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Beth, thank you so much for coming in and giving us a great presentation. I definitely appreciate the way you've contrasted the Imagine 2040 with kind of where we are today. You know, kind of what you were trying to project at the time and where we are. A couple of thoughts. I guess first thing is I would say as long as I'm serving on the board, I would greatly appreciate continued involvement or increased involvement. So as much as we can be involved in, it's greatly appreciated. So if you could definitely include us, or I don't know if it's more of an individual basis, but whatever that picture is, definitely. Because it's become apparent to me that the time frame is really compressed, and there's so many things at play right now. One of the things that has been expressed in this boardroom is the fact that we were going to go back out for public outreach to ask the public, okay, now that we have, this tax money in theory, what do they want? To me, it's interesting. Going back to your presentation, whether you had a 2018 survey that kind of ranked in percentages, the preferences of the public. And one thing I want to point, and rail was topping their list apparently. I think part of our mission or part of our responsibility is to find that balance point between what people think they want or sounds good. And Commissioner Kemp, a lot of your comments resonate with me, regarding costs and really effectiveness. Effectiveness of investment. Our responsibility is to find that balance point between, what the public says they want and what's feasible. In California, they wanted, high-speed rail, and now the bill is coming due, and it's really tough for that state. So the way that I look at this is, it's incumbent upon us to, yes, ask the public what they would like, but then we have to use our consultants and expertise and our staff and their expertise to really flesh that out, what's feasible. And I understand your challenge. You have to present something, on the Fed side. So, I mean, we have a tall order here. Personally, one thing I would like to add, and then I'll just wrap it up, and anyone correct me if I have this wrong, but on a general note, we'll call it the 30,000 foot level, steel wheels cost about 3 times as much to operate and maintain as rubber tire, generally speaking. So I'd like us to keep, if everyone agrees with that general kind of cost differential, even though we have, in theory, a tax, back to your point, Commissioner Kemp, just because we have a bunch of money doesn't mean we should spend it on the shiny object. I think we do have to keep that in mind, that a steel wheel option costs generally 3 times as much as rubber tire. And with the innovations we have, coming online, I just hope that we can really evaluate that question in a very extensive way. So it's incumbent upon us to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Kim.
Just a couple of things to that. I don't know about that estimate, but I do know that we just, in terms of some things, that we have the CSX freight track that exists rather than building new track and new right-of-way and whatever, which is a huge cost differential in terms of that. And second, part of the reason I do know that it is more expensive to operate and maintain a train than buses, but the advantage is that you have an operator for what carries many more people, so that you can than a single bus does, and a ferry carries like 3 bus loads, and a train can carry whatever. So as you grow, that's one of the things that can happen with that. So that's just a point in terms of that. Let me ask just a couple of specific questions, and then I want to ask about the updating of the plan. But in terms of the TIA People Mover Here extension, so that was something that was put into the 2040 plan as a, so is that supposed to be a HART project under transit?
I don't know that the plan was specific in that way. What we were showing was a hopefully seamless connection between the airport and downtown.
Well, but the people mover is it's put out here with these green dots. That's the 300 million a mile thing that I'm talking about. So that extension is the airport to, I guess the rental car is the second dot just like south of it. But then the other parts, is this like into West Shore, like another 600 million or something to extend it this, and that's on the plan now?
That's what's in the plan right now.
And,
yes.
and I imagine that would be fixed Guideway, and the expectation would somehow be that HART would pay for that as part of their transit plan as it exists now.
Don't forget, this was back in 2014.
I understand. I'm just wondering about the process for removing that.
Sure. Well, that's why we're updating the plan right now. So I'm hearing that we are going to be bringing forward some different options for how to make that connection to the airport.
Okay, so that's what's that can happen now?
Of course, yes.
Okay, because I'm very concerned about that, as you know. So then my question is, so when this goes to, we're looking at updating it now, or doing the 5-year update now. But in terms of making updates over time, like you said, it could be let's just say that we, I don't know, decided that I'll say no ferry or something like that. I hate to even say those words, but if we updated it, in the following year, we just,
You can
Just-
come back and amend the long-range plan,
Okay,
yes.
and there's no harm, no foul if we change our minds, but this is a 5-year.
And that would, right, and that would be a very typical procedure after an agency like HART does a major study of a particular corridor, you know, and makes some choices. You come back and adjust the long-range transportation plan to reflect that.
Okay.
Thank you. I would like to ask one more question, but just kind of back to my original point, and as an overarching planning document, I think you pointed out, and what a perception I share, that both the comprehensive plans of the city and the county are fairly robust with regards to the concepts of TOD, but there seems to be a disconnect between those and the zoning code. And I think as we do look at routes, not concentrating on the mode of transportation, because, you know, as Director Melendez pointed out, there's a lot of new technology coming, and, you know, we're at a good time for that. But, you know, will the plan, you know, there's a study underway now, as was mentioned, for transit-oriented development. I'm still not completely comfortable that that's going to focus in at the level of information that would be helpful in getting our leaders at the county commission, the city council, the mayor's office to understand what the best routes may be based on how they would you know, integrate into the community and the ad valorem tax growth and job development potential that could be created around this thing that we're doing. So, you know, it does seem like this planning document, if it could, you know, have more detail with regards to that element, then it would help, you know, all the decision makers, all the boards, and with the planning process, I believe. So, you know, hopefully you'll be able to, you know,
Highlight the
focus on
importance
that
of
between now and
transit-oriented
November.
development.
Yeah. But I think more so than highlight the importance, because I think we've done that over and over, is specifically, if it goes this way, here's the lift. When you put, you know, fixed guideway, or let's call dedicated right-of-way, this way, then the potential lift and the financial impact to the community means this, that, you know, for instance, you know, not just focusing on, say, Nebraska-Florida connection to USF, but, you know, the Citrus Park Town Plan was one done by Dwani, you know, at the behest of the county a dozen years ago, and is a good plan with a lot of potential for job growth and for population growth around a mixed-use sector. And then the Brandon Town Plan, the same thing. So there's a large tract out there, the Gallardo property, and which is yet to be developed, and a huge potential for development in the outlying county. We can look at the USAA headquarters out there and those things, and I think that, you know, having a planning document that helps us to tell that story, you know, that would allow, you know, the county commission, you know, we can say that there will need to be a ton of parallel roadway improvements, you know, that would be in conjunction with robust transit station and that type thing, and that makes up more than half the budget that we're talking about. And I also think that we're a huge county, and that a lot of people need to feel like what we're doing is going to benefit everybody, not just, you know, a connection between downtown and the airport or downtown and USF. So, you know, again, I think that it is a good story. I just would like to see our planning document be able to tell it, and, you know, that it's very specific, like city council, here's the way to connect your zoning code to your future comprehensive plan. County commission, here's some ideas how to connect these two things together. So anyway, I apologize, I didn't mean to give a speech, but thank you for your time. It was a very good presentation.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thanks.
Mr. Chair?
Oh, yes, sir.
Yeah, you don't have to apologize. I for one, I appreciate your comments, and I think that I just wanted to point that out. You know, the decisions we're making today will, you know, or this year, are going to could affect this area for a long time, and you know, so the gravity of your comments is appreciated. So.
And next on the agenda, we have a comprehensive annual financial report.
Good morning. My name is John Gilberto. I'm a partner with Sherry Beckert. We're here to present the results of your audit. And as I say, this is your audit. This is not our audit or management's audits. As the council members, the board members, the HART You are responsible for the financial obligations that HART has entailed itself in throughout the year, and we have audited those activities, and we're here to present the results of your audit. To my left is Lauren Stroke. Lauren's our senior manager, and we have a short presentation to go over the time and the nature and extent of what happened during the audit process. So I'm going to turn it over to Lauren.
Good morning. We have completed our audit of your financial statements dated September 30th, 2018, and we have dated our report February 26th, 2018. We actually follow 4 different standards when completing your audit. The first is generally accepted auditing standards. The second is, I'm so sorry, thank you, is government auditing standards, and those standards require that we take a look at the internal controls related to financial reporting. We also have to follow the Uniform Grant Guidance, which is how we complete your federal single audit. And we also look at Chapter 10.550 of the Florida State Statutes, which is how we complete your state single audit. Lastly, we do look at compliance with local investment policies as required by the state statutes as well. I am pleased to report that all of your opinions were clean opinions. So on the gas report and over your financial statements themselves, we had an unmodified opinion, which sounds kind of crazy, but that's the highest level that we can give you as your auditors. On the gas letter, it was a no comment letter, meaning that we didn't have anything that rose to the level of me needing to communicate that with you. And we'll go into that a little bit too. Oh, I'm so sorry. Perfect. We did perform our audit in accordance with our communication to you in the engagement letter dated June 26, 2018. That's important because if we had to change our audit plan, generally it means we ran into an issue or a problem that I would have to tell you about, and we're pleased to report that we didn't have that. If you're ever bored, I'm sure it's not as good as the 200-page plan, but note 2 of the financial statements go through all the significant accounting policies. So everything from how things are depreciated to how investments would be measured, anything like that, you're going to find in note 2. There were no new accounting policies this year or changes in accounting policies, and later in the presentation we'll talk about some things that are coming down the pipeline, but there was nothing new this year. We do believe that the financial statements are neutral, consistent, clear, and consistent with industry standards as well. The significant or unusual transactions, I just wanted to mention the single audit, and that's because you have a lot of federal and state dollars that, as you know, have a lot of strings attached to them, so we have to look at compliance with all of those attachments. And we are pleased again to report that we did not find anything to know in either compliance or in internal controls over compliance in our audit this year. As I'm sure you're all aware, in your CAFR itself, it's not all just hard numbers. There's a lot of judgments and estimates that go into that, and that's where we spend a lot of our time as auditors. A few of them that are kind of larger, the useful lives of capital assets, which affect your depreciation expense. The OPEB and pension costs, those are based on actuarial assumptions. Management's allowance for doubtful accounts, which is based on their historical knowledge of the base that makes that up. Self-insurance and loss contingencies, which are also based on an actuarial evaluation, and environmental remediation, which is based on an assessment by an independent engineer. What we do as your auditors is we look at all the assumptions that go into creating those liabilities and ensure that they are fair and neutral and consistent and fair to the financial statements. Certain financial statement disclosures are just particularly sensitive because there's a lot of data in them. We deem those to be the pension and the OPEB footnotes. They're pretty long as well. They make up a lot of your footnotes. So if you're ever interested, that goes into everything that, all the inputs that go into creating what those liabilities are going to be. Professional standards do require me to communicate to you any sort of audit adjustment, meaning after management gives us the trial balance. Anything that we find and suggest to management to make. We are pleased to report that we did not have any audit adjustments this year, And we did not have any past audit adjustments, which are things that rise to a level that we have to inform management about, but they could pass on it, meaning I would just tell you that that exists. Why that's particularly good is that means that the data that you're looking at, not just at the audit time, it is relatively sound. If we came in here and had a ton of audit entries, it could mean that the data that you're looking at quarter after quarter may not be so great if there's all these entries to the audit. I did want to talk a little bit about, you did not have any internal control findings, but just kind of what I'm talking about when I say internal controls. The first and least significant would be a deficiency in internal control, or as we call it, a control deficiency. And it essentially exists when there's a situation that does not allow management or employees to realize that there's a misstatement in the financial statements and to correct it on a timely basis. The second level is a significant deficiency, which would be one single deficiency or a combination of internal control deficiencies, which is less severe than a material weakness, but it would be something that I would be required to communicate to you, the board. The third, and the one you definitely don't want, is material weakness, and that's a deficiency or combination of deficiencies where there's a reasonable probability that there will be a misstatement in the entity's financial statements that will not be prevented, detected, or corrected in a timely basis. So just wanted to go over those three different distinctions with you, but again, we're pleased to report that we did not have any such findings this year. We are also pleased to report that we did not have any difficulties or disagreements with management. They were wonderful to work with. Everything we asked for, they were able to provide. Every number we needed, they were able to support. To the best of our knowledge, there are no consultations with other accountants. This would be important only if HART's management contracted with another accountant to rely and say, okay, well, why we're doing this is because this other accountant said it's good. We just want to make sure we got in the same information, so hopefully both groups of accountants could come to the same information. We do discuss matters with management prior to retention, so every year we have to go through a client's acceptance process. That's just part of our professional standards. And we're pleased to report that we did not have any major discussions. Things that could rise to the level would be significant lawsuits, significant losses, something like that that would make us question whether or not we could continue in a professional relationship. With communications that were written, we did receive a letter that was provided to us by management. It's called the Management Representation Letter. And it essentially says that everything that they told us or provided to us during the course of the audit was true to the best of their knowledge and belief. We also issued a management letter that's required by the rules of the Florida Auditor General, and we are pleased to report that that was a no comment letter. Had there been anything that we needed to comment on, meaning non-compliance or issues with internal control, it would have been in that letter. You issue a CAFR, or Comprehensive Annual Financial Report. So there are several different pieces to this. So our opinion covers the basic financial statements, and all of this is listed in the table of contents. With respect to management's discussion and analysis and other required supplementary information, we actually do what's called an in relation to opinion, where we ensure that all of the numbers that should tie to the basic financial statements do tie, and then we get an understanding from the management on how they go about creating that. There's also just supplementary schedules, that being your CFA, or your schedule of expenditures of federal awards and state awards. Those we do another in relation to opinion to. And with respect to the introductory and statistical sections, we actually do not subject those to any sort of audit procedures. I've mentioned the compliance audits a couple times, or the single audits. This year we did test the federal transit cluster on the federal side, and on the state side we did the public transit block grant program. And we were pleased to report that we did not note any non-compliance, and we did not note any issues with internal control over that compliance during our testing. So I believe I mentioned it a little bit before when we were talking about estimates, but we do believe that management employs an appropriate level of conservatism when applying accounting principles. During the course of our audit, we do inquire with board management and several other people about their knowledge of any significant fraud or illegal acts that is required by our standards. If anything significant had been noted, we would bring it to your attention or work procedures into our audit. Nothing was. Last but certainly not least, we are not aware of any relationship with HART that would hinder our independence, so we are independent of HART both in fact and in appearance. We do a couple of other deliverables for you, that being a National Transit Database or NTD report, and this year there is a 10-year report as well. Those are currently in process now. We also completed a data collection form, which is essentially on the federal side of your single audit, just a listing of all your grants, and that gets uploaded into a federal database. So upcoming GASB standards, I just wanted to talk a little bit about that very last one, leases. So what that's going to do is kind of take away all operating leases essentially. It's already happened on the FASB side of things or the for-profit entity side of things. So this is the FASB's version, and essentially you would be reporting any sort of operating lease that you have on the face of the financial statements and the corresponding obligation that goes along with that. That's not going to affect you until 2020, but I just wanted to kind of let you know that it's coming down the pipeline. That way you're not surprised then. And this is just kind of a snapshot of your cash equivalents, and investment balances at a historical level. So you can see at the very top for fiscal year 2018, you had about $14.5 million just in unrestricted cash and about $1 million in restricted funds. Those funds are restricted and held in escrow for the payment of workers' compensation, general liability, and those sorts of claims. And also there's a small amount of funds from private developers that's included in that amount as well. This is our contact information. I am happy to answer any questions that you might have, but if anything comes up throughout the year, we do serve at the pleasure of the board, so you don't just have to talk to me now. You can talk to me at any time. All of our contact information is in there, and at this time I'm happy to take any questions you might have. Thank you so much for your time.
Commissioner Campbell.
I'll just say thank you, and thank you, Jeff Seward. Maybe you should do the fiscal things for the world. We'll have to give you 10 stars. What a great job, and just in terms of, and this isn't an audit question, but one that, especially to this committee, I think is relevant. It's that second to last page there of cash equivalents, and investment balances. This is more just a general question here, or not question, but comment. I came on the board in 2016, and we were feeling the heat of a huge fiscal crisis, which I think is important knowledge for people to have. You can see 2013 we had 22 million unrestricted, 2014 20 million unrestricted, 2015 15 million unrestricted, then it is down to 10 million basically in 2016, and then it goes back up to 12 or 13 and 14. It's getting better, but the fiscal crisis we had basically was a healthcare crisis where our costs rose from 3 million of our not so huge budget to 7 million. Is that kind of a correct analysis?
The years from 2015 to 2016, we had some real issues with the way that we budgeted healthcare and we're spending healthcare. We made the adjustments both in personnel and policy to be able to correct those and more accurately represent what we should be budgeting each year. We also, during that period, was also Mission Max, so we reduced a lot of service during that period as well. But the real adjustment that occurred during that time was we really budgeted what we anticipated we were going to spend versus budgeting what we historically had budgeted. So part of it was the way that we developed our policies, and particularly over the last year. The last year was a little different because I had a little more control over spending than normal. with just a lot of being very fiscally conservative over the last 2 years, particularly over the last year, to be able to build up this fund balance. So I feel very comfortable that we are from the audit perspective, we have sound financial policies, sound internal controls, and we are ready, willing, and able to accept the additional revenues, and with confidence show that we can manage those funds with good stewardship.
Mm-hmm. I think this is just very impressive and a great job, and just wanted to kind of historically point that out too, because I still find that there's a lot of confusion about Mission Max, and people didn't realize that we had to make cuts. They thought it was just a voluntary measure that we took, and it wasn't at all. I mean, we were facing...
we needed to make those cuts.
Yes.
And unequivocally needed to make reductions. And hindsight, 2020, I would have liked to even made further reductions during that time, but it's worked out. We're rebuilding our fund balance now. Even without the sales tax, we're able to build. We added $3 million 2 years ago, or a year ago. We added another $2 million this year. So it shows that we are budgeting and spending sound.
Thanks.
Yes, Commissioner Melendez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to echo your sentiments, Commissioner Campion. Thank you, Jeff. And I also want to say thank you to staff as well. Having served in that chair for 3 years, I was termed out as chair of the Finance and Audit Committee. Every year I was brought in and asked the question, are you, Director Melendez, aware of any fraud? And so that it's a very serious question. I just want to applaud everyone, because on the precipice here of getting greater financial responsibility with more revenue, it's just great to see we do have a great foundation morally. It's just great to see. So I just want to acknowledge that. Thank you, staff. I know you watch on YouTube. Thank you for those that watch. So.
Yes.
I'll move to receive and file a report and forward to the HART board at its May 6th meeting.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
CFO's report.
No report.
And the chair has no report, therefore we're adjourned.
Thank you.